Hello, hello. Okay, I promise, just because I had this clicker, I had nothing to do with all of that back there. So I want to just take a few minutes to give you some background on the survey work itself, the research around that, and then its transition into the tool that we'll be talking about today. So I always love to start any talk about students with this slide. So what do students think about in school? And I was a high school teacher for 15 years, and so I spent 15 years trying to cajole students into thinking about these two things, about content knowledge and academic skills. I thought that is my job. But I've come to really realize that what students think about in school is all kinds of other things, that they're, particularly adolescents, because I was teaching high school, are really overtaken with psychosocial preoccupations, questions about developing identity, because that's really their job when they're adolescents. Who am I? Where do I belong? What am I capable of? Are the questions that they come into high school with. And then when we pile on all kinds of work, that adds on all kinds of other questions. Can I be successful at this? How do I even feel about this stuff? And even if I wanted to do it, do I know how? And if we aren't addressing those psychosocial preoccupations, we can never get to the content knowledge and academic skills. So in 2012, colleagues at the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, so Elaine, who is here, Nicole, who is here, several of us worked together to really try and understand what does the literature say about supporting students' performance in school. We knew that grades mattered, we knew that on track mattered, and so well, what do we know about the things that contribute to grades and performance? And from that, we put together, from that research review, we put together this model, kind of a hypothetical model, based on how the pieces all seem to fit together. And that academic performance was really driven by students' behaviors and perseverance, but it turns out that behaviors and perseverance are driven by academic mindsets, learning strategies, and all of that is supported by the classroom conditions in a classroom environment. We also looked at social skills. There's some evidence in early elementary school that there's some relationship with academic performance. That's less. There's less evidence of that in high school, and it turns out there's just not that direct of a relationship between social skills specifically and academic behavior. But mindsets, there's evidence over many, many years, and particularly what we're talking about here is mindsets of I belong in this community, I feel like I can succeed at this, my ability and effort, my ability and competence grow with my effort, so a growth mindset, and this work has value for me. If students believe these things, or believe even any one of these things, it really propels them to work harder, to overcome difficulties and challenges and setbacks, to apply the academic behaviors that are going to help them really do well in school, and then to earn higher grades. And we really see mindsets as kind of perceptual filters through which they're interpreting everything that happens. And it turns out that what matters more than anything is not some objective reality of what's happening, but what a young person perceives is happening and how they believe, what they believe about that in terms of their own behavior in an environment. So from this, then the next step after we had done this review was, well, let's test this model and let's also see how well we can measure these things. So then we began a survey development project where we dropped social skills and we focused on mindsets, learning strategies, perseverance, and behaviors. And then we got grades in these in the studies. We got grades at the end of a semester after students had taken the surveys. And I want to walk you through how this survey was designed, because it's particularly unique design that allowed us to really tease apart the impact of classrooms. And so over the course, I should back up and just say that we, over a few years from 2012 to 2015, we tested out, we piloted several different survey measures with actually about 10,000 students all around the country, including in Chicago, but more expansively. And once we thought we had a pretty good survey, then we wanted to say, the next question for me is like, okay, well, you can have a survey and you can give people data, but what are they going to do with it? And we really wanted to understand how people would, how schools, teachers, principals would use the data to do anything. And so over the course of the 2015-2016 school year, we worked closely with multiple partners. So 3 school districts in Madison, Minneapolis, and Springfield, Ohio, 2 charter networks here in Chicago, and then 6 individual schools, 5 of which are expeditionary learning or EL education schools, which focus specifically around character development and mindsets. And so we wanted to say, well, okay, like, you know, that those should be interesting places to study. And 2 of our guests today are from the GEMS Ohio School. And so learning how teachers understood the data helped inform then how we built the survey platform for Cultivate to really tell a story with the data that would help them kind of see what the next steps are. So let me say something about the survey design, because it really is a unique design and it allowed us to do something kind of cool from a research perspective. So we got all the students their course schedules in advance. And so when this young lady plugs into the survey and signs in, we already knew that these were her 4 core courses around math, science, English, and social studies. And so we had pre-selected 2 of the classes to ask her about. And so it starts off and it says, we know you're in English 2, and we want to ask you some questions about English 2. And it asks 2 sets of questions. First of all, it asks a set of questions about the conditions in the classroom, mostly things teachers are doing and things the young person is experiencing inside that classroom. And then asks a bunch of questions about her own reports of her mindsets, her use of learning strategies, her perseverance, and her behaviors in the class, her participatory behaviors in the class. And then at the end of the term, we would get her grade for Algebra 2. But then in addition to her, we also asked multiple of her classmates to tell us about Algebra 2. So we could have kind of an aggregate measure of what does Algebra 2 look like as a classroom. And then we looked to see to what extent does this classroom then predict what she says here, okay? And we also asked her about a second class. We go, we know you're also in English 10. Tell us all about English 10. Likewise, she could tell us all about both that classroom and herself in English 10. And then we could compare. If those classrooms are different from each other, according to what all the students in those classrooms are saying, does that line up with differences in her own self-reported mindsets, strategies, perseverance, behavior, and do we see differences in her grades? So that's what I will share with you today. First, just to give you a sense of some of the questions. So the classroom conditions, these are a sample of the questions. Notice that we are always focusing her back on this class and this teacher. So it says at the stem says in Algebra 2, you know, how true is this? And the teacher makes what we're learning really interesting. The teacher knows my strengths and weaknesses in this class. This teacher notices if I have trouble learning something. And then we would ask questions about, okay, now tell us about yourself in Algebra 2. And you can see again, doing well in this class is an important part of who I am. If I'm not naturally smart in this subject, I will never do well in it. I feel like my classmates in this class accept me for who I am. And there was a whole bank of questions around these 2 things. And so what we found was, first of all, that students' mindsets, learning strategies, perseverance, and behaviors, what they said about their own mindsets and behaviors in the class predicted their grades for that class. And if they said different things across the 2 classrooms about themselves, that predicted differences in their grades across the 2 classrooms. And we've seen this over and over again with different samples. Like every place we looked, we saw this same pattern. And let me give you an example. So we know that this related to academic performance, so just let me give you an example of what that looks like. So here you just see high or low on self-reported time management. And these are how many students out of the full sample got A's. and in high versus low, and then likewise you see how many students got Fs versus Fs versus in a low versus high. So again, we saw this pattern here with growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So you see over and over again that the same pattern, and we'll have questions in just a second.
Is this for students or classrooms?
For students, individual students, yeah. And so the same student could actually be in both of these places if they reported a growth mindset in one classroom and a fixed mindset in another classroom, okay? And so we see this pattern over and over again, that you're more likely to get A's, less likely to get F's if you have high versus low. And then we also saw that classroom conditions really predicted what students said about mindsets, strategies, behaviors. And so really overall, what the implications for this is like that how students experience their classrooms really influences their engagement and academic performance, and that teachers don't know how students are experiencing their classrooms. Teachers only know what they're intending to do, but they don't know how that's landing with students. And we actually saw quite a bit of variation within a classroom of how students were perceiving what was happening. And so teachers need ways to hear from students about their classroom experiences and how they're seeing things in different classrooms. And lastly, that cultivating that rather than trying to say, I'm going to try and give this student a growth mindset, if you say, I'm going to try to create the conditions in a classroom that will cultivate young people to develop in a really healthy, positive way, that's the strongest lever that teachers have for impacting the students' growth and development. Okay, that was a quick overview. We have about 5 minutes for if there's questions around that, because that was a lot of stuff. Yes.
So I'm curious about how you normalize or adjust for variance in subjectivity of grading by the teachers. So, right, there are a lot of different ranges. I'm not a data wonk, so
yeah, so teachers have very different grading practices, and we didn't control for that. What we did control for is like how many, we control for the achievement level of other people in the classroom and the demographics of other people in the classroom in one class versus another. So for example, if a class had all super high achieving students or not, like we controlled for those things. But it was such a big sample, and there were so many classrooms that we figured that like the hard graders and the easy graders kind of get washed out in the overall analysis. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, we got to the end of the last slide, right? And we've kind of got this like sequence of events that kind of start with the kids and their perceptions of what's happening in their classrooms and their feelings about it, and the habits that they have as a result of that. So then there's this kind of a really cool claim that better to be a gardener than a carpenter, right? Cultivate instead of build. What's the next step for teachers? Like, how do you get from one to the other, or how do we, and I help manage schools, cultivate that type of thinking with teachers?
When we wrote the survey items around the classroom conditions, one of the things that we really used as a kind of litmus test as to whether the survey item would get in or out is whether it was immediately actionable by teachers, if they could see exactly. So for example, my teacher knows my strengths and weaknesses, it couldn't just be some like, oh, great, well, how am I supposed to make that happen? It had to be something where it was immediately actionable and obvious, like what the teacher could do to improve that thing. Exactly for the reason you were thinking about. Yes.
As a school leader, how would you, what advice would you give on, like, how would someone use their 5 essentials data and complement it with these data, and how does sort of the whole
that's a great
thing
question.
come together?
Yeah, so the 5 essentials data is giving you data about school organization broadly, and this is giving you more specific information about classrooms and what's happening inside classrooms, and as you'll see in the demo, that you can break that down by subject area or grade level or both of those. Yes.
I'm just curious if in any of the surveys or any of the analysis was there ever a comparison between the teacher's perception of what they were doing versus the student's perception?
That's such a great question. Okay, so do you want to guess what the answer to that is? So we asked the exact same questions of the teacher about their own practice, and the teachers and the students' responses were correlated at 0.1. In other words, almost not at all. Okay, so yeah, there's almost no relationship between what teachers said they did and what students said they did. And so I think that emphasizes the point that your own perceptions of what you're trying to do as a teacher can be far afield from what students are actually experiencing and what's actually in play within a classroom. Yes.
Cadence of the survey, so teachers can adjust their strategies and how they.
So we see this as kind of diagnostic of a classroom. Like, so it's in the October usually, and then in the spring. We're actually doing work with PERT's an organization out of Stanford to align it with a more frequent, so teachers can get feedback directly.
How long is the survey for students?
20 minutes?
12.
12. Oh, I thought you said, I was like, 20? That seemed loud. Yeah. They only, so now, okay, so I should clarify one thing. So in the research, we asked them to respond on 2 different classrooms, and then we waited and got their grades, and like all of that takes forever. And so once we found these same patterns over and over in every sample of students we worked with, now what we do is we just ask each student about one classroom. We're not comparing them to themselves. We're just getting feedback about different classrooms from the students to provide back to the teachers. Yep. And yeah, then we don't wait for their grades so that we could deliver the survey results much more
Did you
quickly.
encounter teacher defensiveness?
That's a really good question. I'll let our principal and teacher speak to how they have done it. But that was definitely something people thought about. We don't name teachers in this. It's never down to the Mrs. Johnson's class. This happened. It's disaggregated either by grade level or by subject area, and if you only have one 6th grade science teacher, then you know who that teacher is. But if you're in a bigger school, then you actually don't know which classroom that is, but our thought was grade level teams are doing the work. And so a 9th grade team could look at their data together, or a science team could look at their data together. But we were trying to walk the fine line of teacher evaluation concerns and all of that.
Was there any difference between middle schools and high schools, or could you talk a little bit about that? You just mentioned 6th grade, and I was going to ask a question about, but just in general in the sample, how did that look?
Right, so 6th through 12th grade, the patterns are the same. Some of the items, the relationships, like 6th grade specifically, I think there is a little weaker relationships on some things. And it gets stronger and part of that could just be literacy levels. So, and I think we're probably out of time. Okay, well, thank you so much. And now I want to turn this over to Oren, who is the Director of Technology and R&D at UChicago Impact. And so Oren led the team so once we had done all this survey work, we then started working with UChicago Impact to create a survey that wasn't us. The first time I came to visit these guys, I was bringing PDF printouts to hand to them, and Oren really helped to move that beyond PDF printouts if you wanted your data back.